Let's look a bit more at the shape and size of the advice market. One of the things that our research has focused on for the past few years, and this year it's really stark in the evidence, is that calling all advisors is like calling all cars cars. There's a Porsche and there's a RAV4, and that's true of the advice industry. There's four really strong segments that we can see, and they all have different arcs into the future. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yes, look, over the many years, CoreData's focused on four key segments: foxes, oxes or ox, islanders and cruisers. And our investment in those four segments has matured. And this year was very, very evident as we've actually looked at them and actually then slightly changed the way that we look at them. So foxes are more the smaller licensee, but they're the fast growing. They adopt technology and are doing well, but they're only a small segment of the market, around about 13%, 12 or 13%. Then we have oxes, which are the fast growing also, but the much larger practices that also have adopted technology, and their profitability is going through the roof, and they are very big targets. The foxes and oxes are big targets for private equity. And so they're about 20%. So the old 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, is applying in our industry because the other two segments, the islanders and the cruisers, make up the other 80%. And islanders are probably the one that I would say interests me the most because these are people who I often call them solo. They work by themselves. They probably have got a very small additional support staff. Maybe one or two people. Some only have 3/4 of a person through a week, and they operate independently. I don't think that they actually have a future in the long term. The research is actually suggesting that the world is heading towards where the foxes and oxes are. The cruisers are a little bit different because they're probably at the end of their lifespan. They've got a good client base. They probably work 3 days a week. They're out playing golf on the other couple of days or doing other things such as enjoying some of their passions. But they're probably going to be swallowed up by the oxes and the foxes.
Will they be, though? Because here's a kind of interesting part of this. I mean, the research that you've done shows that the foxes and oxes are investing heavily in technology and processes and making that effort. They're also being invested in by private equity and are very attractive to that because of the yield that they provide. The challenge with that, and as you know, in the UK, about 25% of the advice network is now owned by private equity, and that's likely to be 30% by this year as private equity tries to get closer to the advice margin and further away from the manufacturing margin. When I was speaking to some of the people that are acquiring those firms, they are very interested in the foxes and oxes businesses. They're very willing to pay for it. They're very willing to invest more capital into those businesses to allow them to grow their processes. But when I spoke to them about the other businesses, they said, it's not worth it to us to invest in. There just isn't enough return from it. And then when I spoke to the big networks in Australia and said to them, are you interested in buying these businesses or attaching these businesses? They weren't that excited by taking them on board because of the amount of work they needed to do to normalise the systems and processes.
That's a great point, Andrew. And there is a step between that process. The step between that process is the foxes and the oxes actually absorbing the client bases and actually being able to make them substantially more efficient. The client bases of the cruisers and the islanders substantially more efficient through the technology they've adopted. And that's a step before being actually taken by the PE. So they're looking to bulk up their businesses by taking inefficient businesses that are in the cruiser and islander level, and then actually being able to sell a much bigger business and a much more efficient business for much better multiples to the actual PE.